Welcome back to In Session, day 2 of jury selection in the death penalty case of Casey Anthony. Of course, you know who Casey Anthony is. She's the young mother accused of killing her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. While no one is here in Orange County, Florida, where I am in front of the courthouse, they're all 2 hours away in Pinellas County. They're going through juror after juror, trying to find enough to then voir dire and question more specifically. The first hurdle they all have is hardship. Who can and who cannot take 2 months out of their life to come sequestered to Orange County, Florida, live in a hotel, and come to some verdict in this case? So far, they've heard from about 100. 69 have been excused. 39 have made it to the next round of questioning. But this afternoon, they're going to bring in 50 more jurors and talk about hardship. We've got our whole team with us. Gene Casares is outside the courthouse in Pinellas County. Who else? I've got Beth Karras, of course, in New York. I've got in-session criminologist Casey Jordan, legal contributor and analyst Sonny Hostin in New York. And down here in Orlando, criminal defense attorney Richard Hornsby joins me as well. So we've got a full table here. Let me throw this out. Last night, as I'm doing every night, of course, I was watching HLN. I was watching Jane Velez Mitchell and Brad Conway, the former attorney for George and Cindy Anthony, not the current attorney, but the former attorney, a Casey insider, talked to Jane Velez Mitchell about Casey Anthony, defense strategy, his thoughts. Take a listen to this bombshell.
Whatever he says in his opening comments, they will end up having to prove up. And I think I've kind of changed my position on this. I think that you will see Casey Anthony testify in this trial.
Whoa! Did you hear that? He believes now that Casey Anthony will testify in this trial. Now, a lot of people have been saying, Casey Anthony testify with all those, lies that she has told in the past. And some are admitted lies, and some are just outright lies. Some are white lies. And the prosecution alleges some other ones are big, fat lies. Well, Brad, with his new facial hair, I just noticed that on Brad Conway, believes now that Casey Anthony is going to take the stand. Gene Casares, to me, this is jaw-dropping, just to think about it, because I think most of us are of the mindset, oh, she's not going to testify, but, you know, the more the case develops, it becomes much more of a possibility. So let's just presume now that Casey Anthony does testify. My goodness, Gene, what would she tell this jury?
She would explain what she did and why she did it when somebody else kidnapped her child. Now, Vinny, it makes perfect sense for what we've heard in open court, because the defense wanted to get into the guilt phase, a psychologist and a psychiatrist, to explain what Casey Anthony had said to them, basically, about effects of trauma on her and how she reacted, why she reacted. The judge said no. So if they want to get that in, how else is the defense going to get it in unless jailhouse snitches that took the stand, that would take the stand in the prosecution's case, that she exchanged letters with, because she talks about alleged abuse from family members, could get in that way. But the prosecution has said they're not going to have at least some of those jailhouse inmates in their case in chief.
Richard Hornsby, how about this concept? Casey Anthony getting up, putting the hand up, you know, swearing or affirming to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. How would, I mean, my goodness, it would change the complexion of this trial, number one. But number two, what would she say, Richard?
Well, there's two things that need to be addressed. The obvious thing is that on cross-examination, Jeff Ashton or whoever cross-examines her would just tear her apart. But there is some legal precedence to how you deal with the issue. The law is very clear that you can't ask someone, did every single thing you say was a lie? So was this a lie? Was this a lie? And that's how it would go for a long time. The way it would have to work is she would have to basically get up there and say, yes, she lied about everything. From the moment she was caught until she was arrested, she lied about everything. And leave it at that. And the way the law works is that you can't go in every single issue that she may have lied about if she admits that everything was a lie. The second issue, that would open her up to being allowed to explain what happened and why she went to the great lengths to cover it up. And it's going to be interesting. I think, though, that it could come back to harm her, because if she is convicted, the fact that she, denied whatever culpability in Kaylee's death, that could haunt her in the penalty phase, because then they can use that against her to show a lack of remorse. And so it's a thin line they're going to be walking. I think it's a very risky strategy, but I do believe if you're going to go for broke in this case and try to get the jury to believe that some type of accident happened and that she didn't know how to properly deal with it, the best way would be for her to testify if they can prepare her properly, and that's going to be the big question.
Beth Karras, I want to go to you on something that Richard brought up there, which I think is huge in this case. And we heard it on our own air when Jose Baez was speaking to Christy Paul. He said in the first minute, you know, it'll all make sense in my opening statement. The first minute, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to make sense. And if you put that together with Casey Anthony testifying, I guess it gives the defense the possibility to have an approach to say, you know, there was a terrible accident, not necessarily to point the finger at someone else, although some people are saying maybe he'll point the finger at George Anthony, she'll point the finger at George Anthony, her father, but it also opens the possibility, like Richard said, hey, it was an accident, you know, I messed up, I should have been watching my daughter, I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing, and I wasn't paying attention to her, and something terrible happened, Beth.
Right. You know, good points, and I agree with Jean and Richard, their comments and observations. I believe that if she does testify, it's an effort, of course, to save her life, and that the hope is that there won't be a penalty phase. So they can't be used against her at a next phase. But she's going to have to take it on the chin, those 4 counts of lying to a law enforcement officer. Those are felonies, low-level felonies, but she's basically going to be admitting to those. And really only she's the only one we haven't heard from since July 16th when she lawyered up. 25,000 pages of discovery that have been released. I mean, we know what witnesses' statements are. We know so much about this case, more than any other criminal case I've covered in all my years. But we don't know anything more about her. So she's got something to tell, and she could have the explanation everyone's waiting for. But, of course, the big issue is going to be, what is that tape doing around the skull of Kaylee? What do you know about that? Because that is why the state is seeking death. That's the big difference. They chose not to seek death before the body was found 6 days before. Body gets found on December 11th, and they revisit it, and they choose to seek death. And we're talking about scattered skeletal remains. What's the difference? The tape around the skull.
Casey Jordan, Beth brings up a great point. And how do you address that? I mean, do you think there's a possibility that could be addressed that, hey, these remains were underwater for months, and maybe a piece of tape may have floated onto the skull? It wasn't necessarily on Kaylee. Is that how she explains it? Does she admit, if she takes the stand again and admits something here, does she admit anything about these heart-shaped stickers? You know, what does she talk about?
All right, continuing the hypothetical that Casey comes on the stand and comes up with a scenario, and again, we're just speculating here, that perhaps little Kaylee died of an accident, and her only explanation for how everything got the way it is to say that she panicked, she actually staged the disposal of the body to make it look like it was a kidnapping, a child snatching gone awry, that's why in her moment of panic she had to do searches for things like shovel and chloroform, and had to go borrow a shovel from the neighbor, and had to use the same tape that was found in the house that was wrapped around little Kaylee's head, stuck right to her hair, wrapped, not just placed over the mouth. I mean, all she could say, when I really try to go down this road, is that little Kaylee died of an accident or bizarre natural causes. She didn't know what to do. Maybe she had been out partying when it happened, felt full of guilt, and made this terrible decision to dispose of the body. You know, think of the Menendez brothers, who were also quite sociopathic, I think, in the end. They argued that their abuse and trauma is what caused them to kill their parents, but we all remember that 911 phone call of them faking the fact that they had just discovered their parents slaughtered, and of course, later they found that the Menendez brothers were laughing instead of crying. I think this is the only thing, if they wanted to play for a Hail Mary pass and put her on the stand, that she could come up with.
Sonny Austin, let's continue this hypothetical, this very hypothetical, that Casey Anthony does in fact take the witness stand. You're the prosecutor. You're sitting and you're listening, and you are just chomping at the bit.
Yes, you are.
What's the approach? What's the approach you take, though? Do you absolutely attack her and beat her up?
Yeah,
on cross.
yeah, you do. I mean, and I love Casey's continuance of the hypothetical, because I think that would be the only chance that she would have that a jury would believe that perhaps there was sort of this freak accident and she panicked. I think you attack. You go over all of the evidence, and it's a circumstantial case, but the evidence is pretty compelling. You go over the 31 days, and you go over all the lies. You go over each and every day of the 31 days, and I think you go on the attack, and make her sound like a big fat liar. Just her story just sounds so incredulous. Just doesn't make sense. You want this jury not to believe her. You want this jury not to sympathize. You want this jury not to empathize. You want this jury not to like her and believe that she is a killer.